All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. We're going to be going through the CMAs and Matrix class in just a bit here. Before we get started with the actual course content, though, I did want to run through just a couple basics of our webinar setup. So by default, everyone is going to be starting on mute. That just means that we'll have the option to answer questions under the Q&A button, where you guys can type out any questions you have. Or you can use the chat option for any comments, examples that you guys would like to provide, or any other stories that you want to share with us. We are actually going to be using the chat function pretty profusely during this class. This is actually our most interactive class. So if you don't see that button, or if you're having trouble finding it, we'll cover that in just a second here. Now, we are going to be recording this session. That means that I'll be getting you guys a link to the recording after class. Still waiting on Zoom to produce the final version of the recording for the class earlier today, but we'll get that sent out soon as well. But anyway, if you guys have any audio or video issues during the course, please let me know. That could be something as minor as just the audio keeps on hiccuping, or you guys have had a disconnect from the video or the audio, or both. But if you guys have any problems, please let me know any way you can, either the Q&A, chat, I don't really care. If you get completely disconnected though, give us a call over at the service desk and we can help you get back in. Now, part of the reason why I need to stress reaching out if there are problems on your end with technical issues, the app isn't working properly, you get disconnected, whatever, is because of that CE credit. The CE credit information is actually going to be based on your attendance of this class. Now, for those of you guys who are already here, as long as you're sticking around to the end, you have nothing to worry about. But just as a reminder, you will have to stick around to the end without any significant disconnects in order to receive the CE credit. We'll also be going through and doing a poll that you'll need to participate in, as well as occasionally we'll be asking you to raise your hand just to verify that you're actually present. Combine all that information together, we'll get the attendance report sent off to OREC showing that you attended and participated in class, and you should see that CE credit added to your profile with OREC before the end of the month. So it might take a little bit of time to process the CE credit. We try to get that information sent off to them, pretty quickly. I think it's usually a 24-hour turnaround on our part. But if you do notice that there's any delays, don't worry. It'll still appear before the end of the month. We always make sure that we get that stuff submitted as quickly as we can. From what I understand, I think OREC is actually either in the process of switching over to a new system or has recently switched over to a new system. So a lot of that stuff is going to get streamlined and start appearing much quicker in the future, which is good news. Just so you guys are aware, any of your information that you already provided to actually get into the class, so first and last name, your email address, your license number, phone number, all of that stuff was already collected. So not to worry, you guys don't need to post in chat with your license number or anything. It's already attached to your attendance itself. So we'll be collecting that information from there. You'll be good. You'll be good to go. Now, in regards to the actual interaction, again, this class is the most interactive of all the classes we offer. So down there at the very bottom of your screen, you should either see the chat, Q&A, and raise hand options. Again, chat for the examples. We're going to be asking a lot of questions during class. Make sure to keep that available. Q&A for any questions that you have whenever we're not looking for examples. And then we also have the raise hand option so that if you guys do end up having a question and maybe it's going to be harder to type out or harder to articulate, or you just have a follow-up even after that, use that raise hand option to let me know. We'll get you unmuted and you can actually ask your question with your voice instead. That's especially important for those of you guys who are joining us on a mobile device. If you're joining on a phone or a tablet, you may have to tap the screen in order for those same buttons to appear. They serve the exact same function though. Just remember that raise hand option will allow us to unmute you. This way, in case you guys need to type out a question, you're not having to do so with that tiny little keyboard you got. All right. So we are officially, quote unquote, pulling the attendance sheet. Everybody who is currently present, as long as you guys stick around to the end of class, you should be eligible for CE credit. I'm going to be launching our poll. If everyone could, please participate in this poll as quickly as possible. We're going to go ahead and start class immediately after that, but this is also going to be a requirement if you would like to get CE credit for the course. It's only 2 questions too, so very simple. Just, are you new to real estate? Have you made a CMA before? Awesome. Looks like we're down to our last person. Excellent. All right. Everybody's answered. That makes my life easier. We can move on. So again, today's class is the CMAs and Matrix class. I'm going to put myself into full screen, switch us over to Matrix, because everything that we're going to be doing today is exclusively within Matrix. We're going to be looking up tax records. We're going to be finding comparable properties. All of that can be done directly through Matrix. So I see everybody's got their answers into the poll. It looks like we have at least about half the, actually exactly half the class is either new or relatively new. Then I see that most of you guys have actually created a CMA before, but even for those of you guys who are new and haven't maybe created a CMA, I'm going to try and ensure that you guys understand the why of what we're going to be doing today. So instead of just covering exactly how to do things and how to navigate it and where to click, we're also going to be discussing the logic behind finding the comparable properties. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So the first thing that we need to discuss, especially for those of you guys who are relatively new, is what a CMA is. So a CMA is what's called a comparative market analysis. The easiest way to try and explain this to you, as well as any clients that might have questions of what this is that a CMA is a broad picture of a small area. Now, what that implies is that when we're going through and trying to find a property that's similar to a subject property that we're working with, whether we've got a buyer that's looking to make sure that they're getting a good deal on their property, or a seller that's doing the initial pricing on their property, a CMA is going to allow us to effectively get a snapshot of that small area and figure out what exactly might be the most appropriate pricing for the property. Now, again, this isn't something that's going to be restricted to just buyers or just sellers. You can create this for anyone. There is no need to worry about the information that's being sent off to them as it pertains to like whether or not this is publicly accessible or if you're allowed to send off this info. Everything that we're going to be discussing today is going to be perfectly eligible to send to anyone in the public. Now, this is where we're going to start getting into some of the interactive side of things. So today we're going to be pretending to make a CMA. You're just going to do this from a very practical perspective. I'm going to pull up my quick residential search. This doesn't necessarily have to be your first step, but just to change the visuals on the screen. When you guys are actually starting to prepare a CMA for a client, whether you guys have made one before or just got training on it, what is the absolute first thing that you're going to do when you need to start arranging for a CMA to be made? So, and I'll just give a little bit of context in case that helps. What we're going to be presenting today is going to be the practical steps for a listing presentation. So I'm going to put a little log up here on the screen, and I'll just write down what it is that you guys are offering. There's 3 specific things that we're going to need. So I'm going to try and focus in on those once we're done, but I just want to hear what you guys will be doing when you first get started. So, and maybe just to clarify, this isn't necessarily going to be looking for the details of how we're going to find the comparables. What we're needing to know is what is your first step if you guys were doing a listing presentation, and what you guys would be doing before you start anything else on the CMA. Give you guys another minute or so to formulate what you think. So far we have searching by location, finding active pending closed, checking whether or not we have the address, the client and MLS, pull similar sized homes, age of home, school district. So maybe just to clarify again, what we're looking for is just what is the absolute first step that you do when you're preparing the data. So, and this might seem like a little bit of a trick question, but really what we're needing to search for first. So first step, oops, there we go. Research the property. So before we even start looking for any of the properties, oh, and Nicole just mentioned this as well, we need to check the address. We're going to find out more about the information that's relevant for our property before we start searching for properties that might be comparable. Now, this used to be something that we would have to do either in Realist, or if there was previous listings for a property, you could start in Matrix. But I'm going to show you guys a little trick that we recently added. I think it was either a year or maybe even 2 at this point, a year or 2 ago. We added in a public record search within Matrix. Now, the good news is that this is actually very legitimately just a Realist search that's in the Matrix interface. So if I have a question about a particular property, instead of just trying to start tracking down the other properties that might be relevant, what I'm going to do is actually find out the details about this property in question first. Now, since we're doing this from the perspective of a listing presentation, you guys may already have some of the details because you started a property data form or something, but it's always good to verify the information according to the tax records, just to ensure that when you guys start searching for comparables, you already know what would be comparable. So in here, I can see it looks like I've got 2 buildings on the property. There's 3 bathrooms. So a couple of these details I can use, what year it was built, what area it's physically located in. So I've got a zip code as well as a subdivision. I can hopefully use either of those to actually try and track down some reasonable comparable properties. A couple people have already mentioned pinpointing the location, checking in that area, that kind of stuff. So that's good. So, and actually, now that we've gone through and verified, all right, I'm talking to the right people, I can legally start signing some paperwork. These are the individuals that I'm going to be discussing the listing agreement with, whatever. But I've also gathered some of the characteristics of the property in order for us to start making informed decisions on the comparables. Now we can go ahead and start moving into what it looks like a lot of you guys were excited to start with, and that's searching for the comparable properties. So once our research phase is done, let's go up to the quick residential search. Now let's actually start talking about the elements that you guys are going to need for finding comparables. So in the chat, it looks like a few of you guys have already answered that specific question, but just to pose this again for those of you guys who maybe hadn't offered something yet, what are the comparable criteria that you guys are going to use to try and find properties that are relevant for this particular CMA? So and again, we're looking for a snapshot of the information. We're trying to find out what the reasonable market value might be for a property. So when we're looking for the comparable properties, what are the criteria you will be using? So as we've already mentioned, and a couple people have also written in already, the area is an important one. The size of the home. So we can do square footage, size of the lot, acres, square feet. Bedroom, bathroom count. Year built. Yeah, that's another common one. So school district, neighborhood. Proximity, that's a good one too. Oh, garage capacity, yep. Price, a couple of you guys have mentioned price so far. And I'm going to leave that question open for just a little bit longer. If you guys would like to offer what you think. Again, what are the criteria that you're going to be searching by? And somebody did actually mention status as well. And active, pending, and close, it looks like. Make sure to put that on there. Now, there's one particular piece of information that we're actually looking for, and I was hoping somebody might mention it, but that's okay. We're going to talk about it in just a second here. Leave it open for a few more seconds. Yeah, the area is definitely an important one. All right. Well, so this is a great start. If anything, somebody mentioned the active, pending, and closed. This is a crucial, crucial element. We also have the area. Now, the area is one of the things that is definitely one of the three. Same thing goes with status. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that some of these other options are actually invalid. Like if you're looking for a property that's comparable, but maybe that subdivision doesn't have that many other properties that are the same size, that could be a crucial element to this. Same thing goes with the lot size. I mean, you could find a property that has the exact same house on it. But when it comes down to it, you may end up finding that acreage on the property is what makes the difference in that price. You could find a 3/4 acre property that's the same price and same specs as something that's got no house on it that's got tons of acreage. So sometimes that's not going to be helpful, but other times, if you have a property that has some unique building on it, a unique acreage, you're going to have to maybe narrow your focus down so that you're not just looking for the things that are active, pending, and closed in a certain area if they don't match any other specifications. Same thing goes with bedroom and bathroom count, or this one could kind of almost fall in line with the size of the house. Year built can also be very important. This isn't something that I would necessarily always recommend, but one of the cool things about year built is that if you do end up including it, let's say that you guys are looking in a subdivision that's kind of relatively new by comparison to other properties in the area, instead of having to limit your area by some kind of, subdivision, if there's not one available, you can limit it instead by the year built so that you're only looking at properties that are over a certain age or under a certain age so that you don't accidentally add in results that are not relevant because they're a different year that they were built or different subdivision that they were built in, so on and so forth. Same thing goes with garage capacity. I did actually want to comment on the price side of things. Uh, it might be a good idea to include the price only if there's maybe a huge discrepancy between some of the properties that are being found. Now, a perfect example of this, and I think probably one of the few valid examples of this, would be if you have a lakefront property. Somebody mentioned this previously when we were teaching down in Durant, because there's a lot of lakefront properties in that area. But if you have a search that you've tracked down a bunch of at least similar specifications on properties, if you don't narrow it down by waterfront, you can actually narrow it down by price instead. Because oftentimes there's going to be a huge discrepancy between properties that actually have lakefront or the properties that are even just half a block further away that are just radically different pricing. So I wouldn't suggest using pricing for all of your searches, but as with any of these other options, I mean, you can use that to try and narrow down and get some of more relevant properties. But let's go back to the big three that we need. So we've got our status, active, pending, and closed is good. Another option on there would be sometimes expired. We'll discuss why in just a moment here. The other thing that we need to have besides just defining the area is the time frame. Now, the reason why we end up wanting to add the time frame is because this is going to make sure that we don't get properties that are maybe sold when the market was radically different. When we were teaching this class even last year, I mean, the discrepancy between a property that had sold in February of 2020 versus February of 2021 was huge. I mean, no better evidence of that than how many people ended up joining the real estate market recently. Is there's just a lot of properties that were available, houses are moving quickly, the values have increased in most areas. So if you tried to pull comps that were a year old last year, you'd be getting a huge discrepancy in whether or not those properties are relevant to the current market just because of how quickly the market was changing. It's leveling off a little bit, but as always, it might actually be beneficial to just limit your search to just 6 months. Now, if you are functioning in a more rural area where the market isn't dramatically increasing or decreasing as much as it might be in a more housing dense area, more populated area, et cetera, then you might want to start moving your search out to 12 months at most. Now, the reason why we say that, again, is just like with the example from last year. If you end up pulling results that are from so long ago, you could find that you're tracking down listing prices that are just radically different than what they are now. But in those rural areas or in areas that are less populated, market doesn't shift that much. So just remember 12 months as a max, 6 months is recommended. You can do less if you would like to. Oh yeah, and we had a couple questions about that as well. If we're in a very rural area, it can be very difficult. In fact, actually, when we were discussing this in Durant specifically, there was a lot of people that actually worked where, I mean, you might have a neighbor that's, or excuse me, a client that's out in the middle of nowhere. Their nearest neighbor might only be 2 or 3 miles away, 5 miles away, 10 miles away. So finding a comparable property might require you to dramatically adjust some of these or expand some of these. Now, the status ones are pretty much always going to be the same. You might want to include expireds if you're in a rural area where there's not too many properties moving. The time frame, again, you can increase that to the max at 12 months to make sure that you're finding only the properties that are in that area that could be relevant. But at that point, even if you're not finding anything nearby, maybe expanding your area might help. But I'll be honest, sometimes creating a CMA won't necessarily be possible. In fact, actually, I got a call recently from someone who is trying to price out a duplex in a tiny little city where there was maybe a grand total of 5 duplexes in the entire city, or town, I guess I should call it, which it's reasonable. You aren't going to necessarily always find properties that are identical to whatever your subject is. But if you can play around with some of the specifications on your criteria, hopefully you can reel in something that's going to be relevant. So let's start playing with some of these. One of the good things about these top two options is that whenever you start using the status options in the search, what you're going to end up noticing is that it automatically adds in a time frame. Now we've set the system default at 6 months. So when I check the checkbox for pending, it's going to automatically assign 0 to 180, so 180 days prior. The good news about how this is set up is that no matter when you check this, it's just going to check the last 6 months according to today's date. It's a nice sliding timeline. Same thing goes when I check the checkbox for closed and expired. So what I've done is effectively made it so that I'm only seeing the properties that are currently for sale, the ones that were listed for a certain price, and at least somebody made an offer on it. Whether that's the closing price or not, we're not sure yet. And then we finally have the closed listings showing what an actual value is for whatever the property was. Now, the expired option, I mentioned even when we were discussing this, adding all of these other criteria, that this is a sometimes option, kind of a AEIOU and sometimes expired. What we're doing when we're adding in the expired listings is we're trying to ensure that if there was a listing that was perhaps overpriced, as an example, you may end up having a situation where the client is like, wow, I think my house should be $350,000 because that's what this estimate told me it was going to be. Then lo and behold, you as the real estate expert that actually has training and understanding of what the market is actually like might come in and be like, 300,000, maybe 275 is actually more realistic. Then when you're creating your CMA, you can include those expired listings. And if there are any, which is kind of surprising to see nowadays, but if there are any expired listings, you can point to those, see how comparable they really are. If there's a bunch of specifications of subject property and this comparable that you found that was expired, you can point out to them, look, the listing agent had this at 375, it went down to 350, it went down to 325, and it already expired out of the system because nobody was buying it at that cost. So we need to start looking at a more realistic perspective of what your property is actually going to be valued at in order to actually complete a sale. So that expired section is going to be a crucial element, but again, it's not always something that you're going to have to use. And even more specifically, for right now, it's going to be a little bit hard to find any listings that had expired. So I'm going to leave that in there just because, whatever. There are still some higher price properties that don't end up selling and still end up expiring. We're going to be working with a property that's a little bit more middle of the road as far as pricing goes today. Now, we've already defined our status. As mentioned before, status and time frame are crucial. Now we can start discussing our area. Now, beyond just what we discussed earlier with maybe some of the specifications for a house, these three elements are going to be for every kind of CMA that you can create. Vacant land, residential properties, commercial properties. Those are the three things that you'll need. Now, the area is something that's going to be a little bit more ambiguous. We don't have anything hard-coded like a status or maybe more restrictive like a specific time frame. The area is going to be whatever you define it as. You're always just going to be searching for comparable properties, so restrict this in whatever way you think is necessary. Some people end up using the lender's version of how a CMA works, or a broker's version, which is the broker price option, a BPO, where they have to have the properties within a specific proximity. If you guys would like to make it a little bit more relevant to your property, and there's the availability of it, you can use a subdivision as well. That's the one that we recommend the most, is if you can find a property within the same subdivision, you'll be golden. School district areas sometimes are going to have pretty much the same pricing. Typically, if you're going out to a school district, though, you're going to be pulling in results from all over the place. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to restrict yourself to just one or the other even. If you guys would like to do the school district and then include a proximity search so that you say, I only want to see within this school district, but also I don't want to see anything over a mile away, you can do both. If there's a neighborhood that's defined, you guys can use the neighborhood. I don't know if you guys have actually played around with the neighborhood side of things. But whenever you're looking at the map, you can add in some layers or what are called boundaries. You can add in a neighborhood map. There are some defined neighborhoods in Oklahoma. I previously thought that there was barely any, but most of them are kind of amorphous. And also most of them are going to be located in either Tulsa or Oklahoma City. So we've got a couple in Norman, Edmond, so on, but for the most part, it's in the population centers in Oklahoma and not elsewhere. But if you guys luck out and you guys have a neighborhood area that you're wanting to use, you guys can see those areas here and then just draw on your map to try and narrow that specificity down. But let's take a look at the criteria. I'm going to be using a specific subdivision in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use Eagle Ridge. Now, Eagle Ridge, when I click on my map with just that subdivision, is pulling up things from Tulsa. We got one in Sand Springs. We got another one in McAllister, another one just northern Durant. This is not going to be that helpful. So what I might need to do is, in addition to my subdivision, I'm also going to narrow it down by city. So I can do a little bit of again, a combination of both. I did also want to point out on my subdivision, when I typed in Eagle Ridge, I automatically had an asterisk put at the beginning and end. You'll have to manually add those, but without even putting any other information in, I'm still going to add those anytime I type in a subdivision name. Now, what this is actually doing is it's doing a wildcard search. What that means is that if I put it before, it doesn't care if it's the Eagle Ridge or estates at Eagle Ridge or anything like that. It's just going to say, nothing before this matters, look for this phrase. Same thing goes with the ending. Nothing after this matters, it's just looking for this phrase. So if it's the Eagle Ridge Estates, resub 12, whatever it is, it'll not care. It's only looking for that center section. Now, as we saw, when I went to the map, it found stuff that was all over the state. So sometimes a little bit more specificity is good. Other times, like if you're working with, I don't know, Minshall Park here in Tulsa, there's, a dozen of those subdivisions. You're just going to have to try and pick and choose. Now, further, if we end up narrowing down our area, I always recommend that before you guys start looking at your results, get into the map and make sure that you actually are seeing the area that you're interested in. Because it looks like we have an Eagle Ridge that's going to be up here. This is the actual subdivision I was interested in. And then we also have some other properties down here in apparently a completely separate Eagle Ridge. So this way I can do just a little rectangle around the area that I'm interested in. I've narrowed my search results down to just 12. Now when I go to my results, I can see I've got a couple pending, a few closed, and I'm pretty much set. So if I had a subject property in this area, just wanted to grab these, bring these to my listing presentation in an hour, check the checkbox. And here's our first CMA option, the Quick CMA. When you click on the Quick CMA button, it's just going to automatically produce a report that'll have your contact information up here at the top. If you guys have been through our basic matrix class, you may remember how to do this. I'll do a quick recap if you guys need it. What it's doing is it's actually gathering all of those listings and putting them into separate categories so that you see all of the active, all of the pending, all of the closed, all the expired clumped together. So here we see all of our pending listings put together. Each listing has its own line with its own information on it. And then underneath each section, there's going to be min, max, average, and median. I apologize. There we go. We'll have a min, max, average, and median. Now this is only going to be relevant for this particular section. So if I move down to the closed listings, I'm going to see another section immediately after the status collection. And then after that, I see one that gets all of the results put together so that we can see an average for all and a median for all. And then finally, and this just kind of got swung on to a separate page, we have our quick statistics that show not only the list price, the sales price, but also, this is a recent addition, thankfully, the sale versus list price, so that we see a ratio of how often the properties are selling for either above or below what their actual list price was. Now, interestingly enough, we can see one that was almost 10% off of what the list and sales price was. And we see another one that shows us that the maximum amount was only about 5% more, whereas the average and the median are pretty much comfortably sitting at the list price. So it doesn't appear that there's a lot of either overpricing or underpricing in this area. The market seems pretty stable. This is an easy way to kind of measure that. Just as a reminder, since we're looking at these statistics from the perspective of average and median, an average can be thrown off by an outlying piece of information or outliers if there's multiple. In my case, I've only got 12 properties. I can see that the maximum isn't dramatically more than the minimum ones. I mean, that's still 1,005. It's still a long or pretty wide distance, but the average can sometimes be thrown off, and especially if you guys are working with lakefront properties or properties that have some unique buildings in the area that might even be the same specifications, but they have more acreage or whatever. If those are actually throwing off your numbers, you can see that in the average, but you can always trust that median to be a little bit more accurate representation. Perfect example to try and illustrate that. I don't know if you guys heard about this story back in the day. It was very relevant when I was first getting into college. There was a study that tried to keep track of how much the average salary was for each college major. So you could effectively find out, like, all right, if I graduate with this degree, what can I expect to be making? At the time, I was really interested in graphic design. I got my degree in graphic design, expecting to have a great job. And of course, I graduated in 2008. That wasn't great. But when I was looking at all of the information on the average salaries, there was one huge difference for I think it was geology degree. And what it turned out to be was that Michael Jordan had gotten his degree. And of course, he was being included in those statistics, despite the fact that he was obviously not working as a geologist. But because his salary was so high, he increased the average for the entire selection because of the fact that he was just an extreme outlier in the millions of dollars. And it was a small enough group of people that that sample size allowed his number to just throw everything off. So this is just a fair warning, I guess. Always double check that median. That's going to be your best option. That's an easier way to make sure that you're not having some property that's dramatically overpriced or underpriced ruin your assessment for your client. Anyway, so this is the quick CMA option. So maybe just to do a quick recap, and we're actually going to focus in on a specific example now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start pulling up for a specific property. Now, in my case, I have a property that's out in Turtle Ridge or Turtle Creek. So I'm going to switch this over to Turtle Creek. And remove broken arrow. Is it Turtle Ridge? Oh, that's right. Hey, look at this. I'm shooting myself in the foot. Go back to my map. I still have a drawing here on the map. I can either remove that with this clear all shapes, or I can hit this clear map option. Hey, there we go. Now I've got some matches. All right, so I'm going to go back to my map one more time, make sure that I find the right subdivision. It's like this is the one that I was looking for. I can do a radius, a rectangle, polygon, doesn't matter. As long as I restrict to the right area, I should be happy. I'm going to recenter it. There we go. I can see I've got a bunch of properties on here. I can just head to my results and see everything in there. Again, if I just wanted to grab these and leave it at that, I can check the checkbox and do quick CMA. So if you guys just needed to grab and go, that's an easy way to do it. Another way to set up a restriction, so in case we needed to make sure that we're actually looking at this specific property or this specific subdivision, and the one that I'm interested in is actually at a specific location, There's a proximity search right up here at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set that to be a mile. And then I also have a specific address that I'm going to be using. One of the nice things about how the system is set up is that when you start typing in the address that you're interested in, so 25451 East 93rd, it's going to offer you, even before you finish typing, the address that you might be interested in. Always, always, always use this autofill. If you end up typing it all out, it's not tracking down what you need, there's a very good likelihood that the reason is that it ended up grabbing something from somewhere else, or it's not recognizing the information at all. So as soon as I click on this though, you'll see my map area is now selected. My results went from 31 to 22. And without having to do any extra legwork by going to the map and actually drawing my area out, it set the center point on the property that I was interested in, so that now I don't have to worry about where the results are coming from. I already know that I've got my map set to the correct location. So again, a combination of subdivision. I drew the radius around the particular property that I'm interested in, and we can move forward. Now, in this case, what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to have a specific property that I'm going to be doing this CMA for. So instead of just checking this checkbox and clicking on Quick CMA, maybe I want to give a little bit more comprehensive view of the property or the CMA. So I can actually go over to this print choice. When you click on print, it pulls up all of your available reports that you can do through Matrix. And down here towards the bottom, there's a couple different CMA options. Now, the Quick CMA is actually going to be the original version of the CMA. For those of you guys who've been in the industry for a while, or at least been using Matrix for a while, you may have noticed that our Quick CMA format changed recently. That's actually what's referred to as the Quick CMA 8.4. Now, when we clicked the Quick CMA button earlier, it was doing the most recent version. In this case, I'm actually going to use the old Quick CMA option. And then since my client's a little bit more visual, I am as well, I really prefer to actually see the addresses as well as be able to see what the property looked like, because I'll know what it looks like. I can hold down Control or Command if you guys are on a Mac and click on 3-up comparison. So I have Quick CMA and 3-up comparison. So now when I go down to print to PDF, it's going to add the regular old Quick CMA version. Notice it's a little bit more dense, still offers all the same basic information. And then it has an additional couple pages that include the 3-up comparison. Now it's notable that in this case, I have a specific property in mind, but this 3-up comparison is just showing me property by property. It doesn't show me a subject property. It only just shows me the listings that I found. This can still be easy to use. You can highlight things on here. You can note what the list price is, but you're going to have to add all of that information by hand. Any explanation that you're actually wanting to augment this report with is going to have to be done after you've produced it. Now, if that's not appealing, or if you guys want to start with a little bit more comprehensive report, I'm going to click back to results. And this time we're going to do the CMA button. So just again, a little quick recap. We defined our criteria. We narrowed down our focus using a proximity and a subdivision. We got to our results. I chose either the all, which selects everything, no matter how many pages they're on, or if it's all on one page, I could just check this box, and I've got all of them checked. You can see that illustrated up here. And then I chose either Quick CMA, my print options, or the final option we'll be discussing in class is the CMA button. Now, this is going to produce effectively a full report. Interestingly enough, it does give us the offering to connect this to a person. I would strongly suggest this, especially if you guys are working with a seller like we are in our example here. The reason being is because these CMAs that we're producing will actually be kept in the system for up to 6 months. So that way, if you guys do end up wanting to kind of reference back to it, or maybe check in on some of the properties that you initially found, like in this case, we found a bunch of properties that were pending. Once those sell, we're going to know for sure whether or not our pricing was accurate, but at least while it's been pending, we can get a good estimate from this. But if in 2 or 3 months we find out that a lot of the listings ended up selling for less than they were listed for, then we might want to start adjusting things. And I can just jump right back into the CMA and see the information, make some changes, redo the search, run that quick CMA or the CMA report again, and update that pricing. So in my case, I do actually want to get this connected. I'm working with George Foreman right now. Surprising, I know, but he named his house the same thing he named all of his kids, so it's easy to recognize it. We got our description. You don't have to put a description in. It might be worth mentioning that neither of these things are actually required. It's just for your benefit that you can connect it to a contact and you can provide it a description. In case you guys don't have a contact for the person you're creating this for, especially in the case of somebody who's doing a listing presentation, it does give you a little button here to add somebody and only requires first, last, and email address. And that's it. If you're going to be sending them something, probably already have that info. Might as well just make them a contact. Now, the next step on this, as you guys can see, we've got this little arrow that's pointing through all of these different steps. I'm going to move over now to the Pages option. Now, when you first get into the CMA report options, it's actually not going to have any of these chosen. I'm going to clear this out so we can see what it looks like if we started from scratch. You notice that when we started, all of those were available. Now that we've cleared those pages out, suddenly none of these are available. We can only add pages, and these tabs are actually going to be defined by which pages we add. So first thing first, I want to make sure that I have a cover. I clicked this little plus icon to expand it. You can also contract, expand, so on. I'm going to use the cover sheet with a photo. This means that I'm actually going to have a cover. It's going to have my contact information. I can upload a photo of the property in question. That's a nice aesthetic, at least in my opinion. If you guys don't have a photo of the property yet, you can always just use this cover sheet where it doesn't reference having a photo. I'm going to contract that section. Let's expand this subject and adjustments. This one actually includes 2 items as well, summary list and price adjustments. Now, when I click on summary list, you'll notice that the adjustments and pricing option will now allow me to, actually I need to click both of those. Pricing adjustment, pricing will pop up in a second. Why is this not showing up? Oh, because we didn't choose a pricing recommendation. But instead of having to manually add each of these, you do have the option to include everything just by clicking on the subject's title. So if I clicked on subject/adjustments, it just adds both of those at once. And then the same thing's going to happen when we click on the comparables button. So now it's added in the adjustments tab. It's added in the pricing tab because I got my pricing recommendation added. And I can move forward in my wizard now. Now, there is a separate section that I did want to just at least mention is the static pages. Now, the static pages are going to include a bunch of pre-configured information. They're not particularly pretty. They're very utilitarian. And if this my guarantee to you is any indication, they may be referencing things that might not necessarily be things you want to deliver to your client. I'm pretty restrictive with what I'm going to be sending people in regards to what I'm offering to them. So this my guarantee to you might be exactly what you want to show them, or it might not. The only way for you guys to know that is to just run through this CMA report option and click on one of the, click on any actually of these static choices and find out what they say. Now, in my case, I'm not going to include any of these except for this my guarantee to you, just to kind of highlight what it says on it. I'm going to collapse that static section. And there's one item in the CMA map. So if you guys are wanting to have the map, which I always recommend, just click map. Now, as we've been going through, it's just been dumping everything over into this selected pages. We didn't choose how the subject and adjustments were going to be added on there or what order. We didn't choose how the comparables were going to be dumped in there. So what I wanted to highlight is over here on the right-hand side, we can see the list of all of our selected pages. And if you have something that you wanted to move to a different place, so like if I wanted to move the my guarantee to you to be the very last item, I just select it, click the arrow and it'll rearrange. Same thing goes for my CMA map. I'm going to put that right at the very beginning. So I'm just clicking the up arrow until it's in the right position. If it turns out that there's something that you don't want, so for instance, maybe this CMA brief isn't of any relevance to me, or I don't like the way it's laid out or whatever, I can just select it and then click the X. So that instead of just rearranging it to maybe not be as visible, it's just off the selected pages. Now, in addition to all of this, you do have the option to upload custom pages. This could be something that's specific for this property, or it might be things that your company would like you to include when you send off CMAs. Either way, if you guys end up adding custom pages, those can be included on this set as default option. So once you guys have added in any of the pages from either the available pages or your custom pages, you can set a default, which allows you to just jump back into the CMA report the next time you're trying to make one. And all of these tabs will be open. All of your pages are already in the order that you would like them to be, and you've already included all the pages you would like to include. Very simple, makes things a lot easier the next time you guys start one of these up. And the benefit is that if you do end up making any adjustments to this particular report, it's not going to mess with any of my defaults that I have the next time I jump in here. There is still a restore defaults option. So if you did mess with this and then you're like, wait a second, I didn't like that, you can hit restore defaults and it'll put everything back in the order that you liked it. There's also an option here to clear. So instead of having to manually select each and every one and hit the X to try and get rid of it, you can hit clear and it just gets all of them off the screen at once. All right. Now, next, let's move on to the tab after, which is the subject. There's a couple different ways for us to actually enter the subject information for the property. If this is a new property that had never been listed before, you're going to find yourself using this type in the subject property fields manually. This isn't the ideal, I'll be honest. If you have to start adding all of that information in there manually, it can be a little cumbersome, but again, the payoff is that you actually get to show the client something very relevant to them. If you do luck out and you had a property that had previously been listed, you can actually just paste the listing number directly in there and hit fill. If you don't already have this, but you know the listing has been, or the property has been listed before, you can use this search option to try and track it down. Again, all of this to avoid having to enter everything manually. But I got my subject property put in there. I've got a listing number for it, so I'm going to just hit fill. Now what fill does is it takes all of the information that we needed on here, puts it in there. This is actually 25451 East 93rd Place, which I needed to put in. Looks like the rest of this is correct. Maybe they added in a half bath at some point. This remarks obviously is no longer relevant. It's not new construction. It's been around there for at least 5 or 6 years. Clear remarks. So that's out of the way. We've got a rendering of the property. Maybe I actually want to clear the photo and upload a brand new photo. I'm going to leave this for now just for illustrative purposes. A little further down on this sheet, clear out a couple extra things, and I think we should be set. The rest of this stuff looks like it's accurate. So over on the map location, it isn't necessarily required to do this, but especially if you guys are pulling from a listing previously, it's just a wise idea to make sure that it's actually located in the right spot. This doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to, thanks to just us trying to be a little bit more diligent about it. But we used to have a problem where people would be uploading listings into the system, and those listings will end up being mapped radically incorrectly. And by that, I don't mean just that it's, the wrong house in the subdivision, like this one happens to be. I'm talking people will have listings that were supposed to be in the United States and are actually in China. Or there was a whole school district in the Ada area in Pontotoc County, the Latta School District, where all of the listings in that area at one point in time were just mapped in Saskatchewan, Canada. And it literally was just because there was a bunch of rural roads that had the exact same naming convention and the exact same house numbering convention. So it was just very confusing. A whole bunch of people didn't realize that it was happening because they went to their map, They didn't bother zooming out to make sure that they're in the right spot, and they ended up, mapping something in a different country. But usually it's pretty minute stuff. Like this one, the original pin was over here. When they finalized the subdivision and the construction was completed, this was the actual parcel that's relevant for this street address. So in this case, what I did was I ended up putting in the street's address, put in the city name, hit locate, and it dropped the pin on the actual property. If you guys ever want to verify that this is the exact property in question, you can always click on that parcel and it'll provide you with the information that you need. So in this case, I actually was working with Kate. She's the one that owns it. This is the property's address that I was looking for. So I got the pin in the right location. I can adjust this if I need to by clicking and dragging. So like if it was just down here and I knew this was the one, I can move it that way as well. Now I'm going to click done. I've got my map updated. Wow, down to, I'm trying to remember, at some point, there's the amount of decimals after the latitude or longitude that you're getting into the hypothetical of how accurate something is, because you're like measuring the distance between atoms after a certain number of decimals. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Next, we're going to look over at the cover. So as we started, we added in a client if we needed to. We got all the pages that we needed. We've defined what subject property we're using. Now we're just going to make sure that everything on the cover is correct. Looks like I got my contact information in there right. I've got a subject cover photo, which was defined by the cover choice that I used. Now let's move to the comparables. The comparables is actually really handy because what we're going to be seeing in this situation is I'm going to have my subject property here, and all of the properties around are going to be defined by how close or how far away they are from my property. Now, in my case, when I ran my search, it looks like it ended up putting the circle in not exactly the right spot. So these aren't in the exact order that they need to be. I can switch that by just clicking on distance. So now what I'm seeing is, here's the property in question. Here's what looks like next door neighbor. We've got another couple people that are probably nearby, or in this case, probably again, literally a neighbor. So we can make sure that this is sorted in a method that's actually going to make sense for our clients. You can add more listings either from a search, or you can add more listings from a cart that you've created. I think somebody asked earlier, if you're working in a rural area and you're having trouble finding comparables, if you do end up manually needing to go out and try and find comparable properties, you can add those in from a cart. The main limitation that any of this has is that you only get to look for properties within the matrix system. So if you do have a for sale by owner, you're not going to be able to add that to the information on here. That would be a search that you'd need to do either in Realist or RPR. If you guys don't have any experience with RPR quite yet, this is a tool that the National Association of Realtors provides. It will be able to find all of the tax record information, all of the listing data in our area, as well as several other MLSs in our area. So if you guys are looking for a more comprehensive perspective of all of the properties in the area and getting comparables created for that, RPR is the next step up from searching within Matrix. But I've gotten everything that I need to for now in my comparables. I'm going to double check that everything is correct on the map tab. Here's my subject property. Here's all of my comparables. Again, these numbers are trying to indicate which one is actually being pointed out here. And as you can see, the numbering convention is by proximity to my subject property. Finally, we get to the adjustments page. Now, this is where you guys are going to have to leverage your expertise as a real estate agent. I can't stress this enough. This page is going to be more for those of you guys who have had some kind of extensive experience in the industry or have had explicit appraisal training. The reason being is that what we're looking at here is a listing by listing, attribute by attribute pricing. So what I can do is, if I recognize that maybe this particular property has an extra bedroom compared to my subject property, I might need to actually decrease the value for this property based on how much an extra bedroom is worth in this market, in this area. So in this case, I would probably say, again, please don't take this as gospel. I'm just putting in a number to illustrate this. If I think that that extra bedroom is worth an extra $15,000, what it'll do is it'll actually average this out for me so that when I'm looking at the adjusted price, trying to offer my pricing recommendation to the client, my adjusted price is going to be something that I went in there and I said, these are the prices for these elements. This is what I think the adjusted price would be if it were more similar to your property. Now, it goes beyond just the property type, bedroom, full bath. Down here at the very bottom of the page, you can actually click the arrows. Notice this actually moves these columns over and over. So if I had a property that had an extra full bath, or if I had a property that had a half bath put in, or even if there was a square footage that was just obscenely higher than mine. So like in this case, looks like a couple of these are at least close to 300 extra square feet. Maybe I want to say minus $1,000, maybe minus $1,500, minus $1,000, oops, and so on. So again, this is some pretty high level stuff. If this is not something that you're familiar with or comfortable with, or have an expert that can help you kind of adjust this, don't worry about it. So that brings us to our final step, which is the pricing option. You can see in this case, since I did make some adjustments, there's a difference between the comparable prices that the system found and the adjustable price or the adjusted price that I created for them. Down here, I've got my suggested list price. This is where I would recommend putting in not just a specific number, put a comma in there, but I'm also going to add in a range as well. So I can do 195 to, let's say 220. There we go. And then you also have an option to add in any additional notes in case there was, something you wanted to say about the house, like this is a recent house, the exterior is in great condition, interior is in great condition, so we can lean into the higher price range or whatever it is that you need to communicate. After you're all done with that, you click finish, and that's it. Now this is going to automatically be saved, but you do have the option to manually save it up here, or you can get rid of it entirely by clicking this X. You can also view the PDF of this. I'm going to click that button and I'll linger through that. Or you can email it to the client. Since I already added the client, I can just hit that button, start up an email, and it's on its way. But that's it for our class today. I'm going to leave the session running for a little bit here. I'm going to go through and actually just show you guys what the CMA report looks like. I would very strongly recommend that you guys play around with this stuff. So even though class is officially over, if you would like to ask any questions or have any specific properties that you'd like for me to maybe help you with, we'll stick around for a bit and check that out. By the way, you may remember when I was going through and doing the quick CMA and then combining it with the 3-up comparison, it was just doing all of the properties. In this case, when we did the CMA report, it has our subject property and then 2 of the comparable properties. So strongly recommended that you guys use this if even that's the only thing that you guys need to use it for. This also breaks down each of the price adjustments for people. So if you do end up going through and actually using that adjustments page, this will note each and every change that you made so that the client can actually see that and why it was that you made those modifications. Again, I'm just leaving the session open if you guys have any questions. For those of you guys who are just here for the CE credit, you're more than welcome to leave. Any of you who joined us at 1:05 or earlier should be eligible for the CE credit. Oh, actually, let me scroll down here. After all the comparables, oh, here we go. We got a minimums and maximums page. It's pretty open. This might not be one that you may want, but might be helpful for people. We've got days on market, allowing people to see, how long the longest time was that a listing was in the system. I mean, look at this. This is barely over 2 weeks for most of these. or not even to 2 weeks for most of these, and only a couple that got over that. Market's pretty crazy. Here's our price graph, how much it listed for, how much it sold for. You can see the ones that don't have a sold price are the pending listings. It looks like our price range is all going to be in between this top and bottom here. Pretty reasonable. Yep. Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you do end up having any questions or problems or anything at all that you guys need assistance with within the MLS, give us a call over at the service desk. I myself am going to be a little bit busy. We have a new hire that's joining our service desk staff, so I'm going to be training him for the rest of this week, probably a good portion of next week as well. But the rest of our staff is available. If you guys have any problems or questions at all, just reach out to us. We're more than willing to assist. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. Have a good one. Stay safe. Keep wearing your masks. Keep social distancing, and hopefully we'll be back in the classroom soon.